Hey Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and it is time for my review of the 5th studio album from Hillsong United. This one is called Wonder. United is a worship band, being one of the 2 touring subsects from the Hillsong Church in Sydney, Australia. Now, if you're wondering, oh, why is Landon covering worship music? I thought he was just an electronic music critic. I don't really like to box myself in with just that term. It is true that I do like to primarily review electronic dance music, but I do like to kind of get out of that vein every once in a while. If you guys have noticed, I've reviewed more rock music and rap music and things outside of that vein this year, and I actually did review Hillsong United's last album as well. That was Empires back in 2015. And of course, that album was actually the album that I picked as my #1 album of the year for that year. So that being one of the 3 top albums I've ever picked on this channel for my #1 slot in that series, of course, I had to review their follow-up attempt to that album. And regarding why I covered Hillsong United on my channel to begin with, there's kind of an interesting story to it that kind of brings it full circle. I grew up in a Christian household, and looking back to my early years of life, I remembered having this cassette player that I always liked to listen to music on, and a lot of the music that I'd kind of funneled through that cassette player was worship music, worship cassette tapes. From there, it kind of evolved into me listening to Christian pop, positive radio, that kind of stuff, Skillet, 1000 Foot Crutch, Newsboys, Toby Mac, all that. After I discovered Owl City's Ocean Eyes album back in 2009, I kind of started to make a slow transition from the world of Christian pop into electronic music and EDM, which I didn't get fully immersed in as my primary genre until late 2012, early 2013. While I was kind of in this dark place, being completely and fully surrounded by electronic music and really kind of blocking myself out from my past in Christian music and everything else, a remix of Hillsong United's Oceans made its way kind of into my SoundCloud feed, and then from there I checked out the original, and it was just the most beautiful experience. Simply said, the entirety of the Zion album by Hillsong United was key into me kind of getting a new respect for worship music and kind of getting back into Christian music, period, and really thrusting me into other genres as well, just generally kind of pushing me out of the hole of electronic music I was in for a couple years. And of course, I had heard of Hillsong United prior to the enormous popularity of Oceans back in 2013 and 2014. In fact, I had enjoyed my fair share of the content off their Aftermath album, which was the one right before Zion. But of course, I do feel like Zion was really pushing them into some seriously new directions and taking a really creative twist on worship music that I've been able to respect since the very first listen of that album. I love the way on Zion that Hillsong United was able to take these really anthemic worship songs and kind of mix that with a little bit of indie rock influence, and then of course layered kind of over on top of that throughout the album. There was a lot of ambient electronic music influence, and overall I was just completely immersed in this thing. I can still pick up this album any day and enjoy it all the way through, even if I know all the lyrics word for word. And then of course their follow-up to that album, 2015's Empires, was a lot more electronic influenced, generally carrying a lot of a darker sound, and was easily adaptable to their live acoustic version of Dirt and Grace, which released just last year. And I kind of picked on Empires a little bit for not being as anthemic or energetic as the Zion album, but I came to respect it as a lot more of an experimental album, obviously, with the album placing at my #1 spot for 2015. So regardless, I was very, very excited when Hillsong announced a follow-up to that album, of course, being this Wonder album. And right off the bat, with the very first single they dropped from this thing, the title track, the first track, Wonder, I was caught off guard. I'm sure everyone else was caught off guard too at just how poppy the song sounded. In fact, I thought this was some kind of Hillsong Young and Free throwaway, that of course being their kind of EDM subsect. And while I did like that single a lot, I really especially loved just how bright and colorful it was just compared to the Empires album. I regardless was kind of worried about this album, thinking this is going to be kind of a step backwards, going again into that pop, more like anthemic worship vein that Zion was in, as I started to kind of appreciate Empires as a more experimental work. work. I was kind of hoping they'd continue running in that direction and just keep making worship more and more unique. Kind of stepping back into that vein had me a little bit worried, but the end result is okay. Along with that, the Empires album carried a hint of controversy, of course, including a worship song using the phrase "hurts like hell," which I don't think had been used in worship music prior to that point, and I, along with a lot of other people, kind of assumed this album would be a little more controversial than that one, but then it ends up being quite a bit less. With the Hillsong Church kind of being so progressive, a lot of Hillsong fans were assuming the very colorful nature of this album was supposed to symbolize some kind of support from the church toward the homosexual community. I'm not saying I'm personally opposed to that, of course, it's just that the Christian church has generally been known to be pretty anti-gay since the early days. That theme doesn't come up in this album at all, and that's kind of how I anticipated it to be. I'd say more or less the colors just represent kind of the beauty of creation. In fact, I'd say that the only thing remotely controversial about this album is Hillsong believing in a spherical earth. To which one commenter on Facebook was pretty furious about, but I got a good laugh out of that comment. Back to this album's overall sound, returning to this thing as a whole, yes, Wonder is a lot poppier than the Empires album. In fact, I'd kind of say that Zion split off into two different ways, kind of its experimental side going into Empires and its more poppy side kind of going into this album. Wonder really doesn't feel like a natural progression from the Empires album, but that ends up being okay, and I ended up liking this album quite a bit. And I mean, it definitely does do its job kind of differentiating itself quite a bit from the Zion album. It's just kind of progressed in a way from these standard worship anthems into, dare I say it, stadium worship. There are hints of pop rock bands like U2 and Coldplay scattered all across this album. In fact, I was kind of getting like an early Taylor Swift vibe from the song Shadow Step, which comes pretty early on in the album. And like I said, this isn't necessarily a bad thing because I really like this album a lot. In fact, the only song that I can say I genuinely didn't enjoy was probably Shape of Your Heart. This song, I think, is the first one that Hillsong United has done that has featured entirely auto-tuned vocals, and when this song dropped as a single from the album, I was quick to kind of come to its defense just because I was kind of in the mindset of the more experimental Empires album, but when listening to this song in the context of the rest of this album, oh god, it just doesn't sound good. And I wish that I could say taking the vocals out of this song and making it an instrumental or just straight up taking off the auto-tune would have improved the song a lot, but honestly the instrumental and production wasn't that exciting either. The only other pick that I have on this album is a bit of a smaller one, and that's on the song Greatest of These, where I feel like Hillsong severely underused Brooke Fraser's vocals. Obviously she was the singer from one of Hillsong's all-time biggest songs, What a Beautiful Name. That one kind of blew up within the last year from that Hillsong Worship, Let There Be Light album. In regards to Brooke, I feel like the vocal layering is just a little bit off for me, and this definitely wasn't one of her shiniest vocal moments, not really showing off any kind of really intense range in this song. And that brings on another point that I have regarding the vocal mixing on this album. At least in a lot of songs, especially on the ones featuring Taya Smith, I feel like the vocals kind of awkwardly sit really in front of the mix, and that's probably because this record was supposed to be a bit more of a poppy one, so the vocals are supposed to stick out a little bit more, but I personally enjoyed Hillsong's music a lot more when the vocals tend to kind of sit back a little bit more organically in the instrumental. And now that those picks are out of the way, let's get into the good stuff. Honestly, like a lot of the moments on this album are some of my favorites in Hillsong history. The song So Will I, aka 100 Billion Times, is arguably my favorite song that Hillsong has ever done, maybe just since Oceans, if I'm hyping this one up a little bit too much. But it is an absolutely beautiful song, easily the most standout from the album for me. The song beautifully portrays God in every way it possibly can, from being a creator to a forgiver to a savior. The lyrics of the song, especially in regards to its sections about creation, are just absolutely immersive, and I feel like really push off across the point of wonder that Hillsong was trying to go for with this album. Really better than any other song on this album, even better than the title track does. does. I get serious shivers every time I listen through this song. In fact, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it right now. Some other moments that I absolutely loved on this album, the outro on Splinters and Stones, kind of with that little piano break, and then Taya's vocals come in and she just absolutely lets loose. It feels very natural, very organic, like she wasn't sitting in a studio listening to a click track trying to kind of sync up with this thing. Everything feels very, very worshipful, like it was really the way it was supposed to be performed live or something like that. The Let Love Take Over duet on Glimmer in the Dust is absolutely beautiful, of course, and then Taya comes and does it again very naturally in the outro of this song. I really love that. This is also one of my lyrical favorites from the album. You've got Rain/Rain, which I kind of expected to be a lot cheesier than it ended up being, but in the end I really loved the kind of gospel outro the song has. I don't think Hillsong United has really done that a lot. They've always been centered toward more of a band sound than more of a kind of live sound, and putting that toward the end of the song I think really worked for this one. And then you've got Water to Wine, which is the album's much more atmospheric outro. The lyrics on this song were pretty decent. I didn't love them as much as some of the other moments on this album, but my personal favorite part of the song is the outro, where we have a child kind of reminding us that love just means love. And really that theme here is just taken and stuck all across the record, with Hillsong continuously reminding us the true meaning of Christianity really being love. You know, I didn't think this album as a whole was phenomenal by any means. Of course, there were some absolutely amazing moments that this album has to offer, but kind of putting this thing out as a whole, in my opinion, it wasn't as strong as their last two records. Then again, I kind of said that with Empires too, and that ended up being my #1 album of 2015, so that could easily change. But I think the main takeaway is that Hillsong is once again reminding us that they are really at the forefront of creativity and worship music, and they're able to kind of really do a sonic change in sound with every single album. And this album sharply contrasts itself with Empires. Obviously, even just in terms of the artwork, that album was very black and white, kind of contrasting. And then this album is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, just bright, colorful, and really different. And I ended up enjoying this thing a lot more than I thought I would, kind of given the singles. Really like this album. I'm probably feeling a light 7.5 out of 10. If you haven't listened to this album and you have some interest in doing so, as always, I have the Spotify link down in the description below. And if you have listened to this album for some reason, let me know what you think about it down in the comment section below. As always, I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I'll catch you later. Peace.